The U.S. Medal of Freedom, an insignia donned by figures such as Mother Teresa, Helen Keller, and awarded to the legacy of activists such as Martin Luther King Jr. Now the U.S. President Barack Obama has given America's highest civilian honor to his Israeli counterpart, Shimon Peres. What are his achievements, you ask? Well, to name some, Peres has presided over several Israeli wars in the region, most recently, that is, the wars on Lebanon and Gaza, which left scores of civilians, women and children dead. In an election year, a seemingly desperate Obama praised Peres during a ceremony at the White House and described him as the symbol of the alliance between the U.S. and Israel. This is while Gaza remains under siege for its sixth year. Illegal settlement outposts continue to pop up in the occupied territories, and crimes like the murder of activists on the Freedom Flotilla still remain unanswered. Is the Washington-Tel Aviv connection giving Israel a license to kill? I'm Barry Honador. Join me tonight on Press TV's News Analysis.
Giving your country's highest medal of honor to an Israeli official. That would have seemed unlikely given the unpopularity of the Israeli regime internationally. But it's not the case when it comes to Tel Aviv's staunch ally, the United States. U.S. President Barack Obama has decorated his Israeli counterpart with America's highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom, during a ceremony at the White House. Obama hailed Peres as the, quote, essence of Israel and symbol of a decades-long alliance between Tel Aviv and Washington.
He is a dreamer, and rightly so, for he knows what we must never forget.
Basically, one criminal is honoring another criminal, and this is injustice by itself. I think the American president should be ashamed of himself for what he's done and what he's doing by honoring somebody whose his hand is full of blood with Lebanese, Palestinian, and Arabs throughout his history.
It's grotesque. It's an affront to every American except those who put Israel first. It's an offense to every person of goodwill that this indictable war criminal, serial war criminal, would be so honored. But of course we know that there's only the main reason is the election that is coming up for President Obama, and I view this as a down payment on the Jewish vote, which according to Haaretz has dropped 22% in New York State alone because of the mistrust or distrust they have of Obama.
Along with other Israeli officials, Peres has presided over several of Israel's illegal wars in the region, which have killed thousands of civilians, including women and children. Israel's 2010 attack on an 8th flotilla heading for Gaza has also happened under Peres. The attack left 9 peace activists dead. An Israeli watchdog has recently condemned Tel Aviv for the killings, but criticism of Israel has always fallen on deaf ears at the White House. The U.S. has thrown its full weight behind Tel Aviv since Israel's creation 6 decades ago, and it's vetoed many anti-Israeli resolutions at the UN Security Council to disadvantage of Palestinians and other nations in the Middle East, which is why the U.S. is also as unpopular as Israel, most particularly in that part of the world.
Because it is a client state of the United States. The United States has total impunity, and that is inherited by its allies and clients.
Well, my guests joining me tonight are Mr. Paul LaRuti from the Free Palestine Movement from Berkeley, freelance journalist and blogger Mr. Michael Santomaro from New York, and co-president of the Palestinian and Jewish Unity, Mr. Bruce Katz from Montreal. Let's start off with Montreal. Bruce Katz, Obama praised President Shimon Peres as the essence of Israel itself, as he awarded Peres the highest civilian award the United States government can bestow upon an individual. Now, much of the international community might disagree with Obama as seeing the essence of Israel worth rewarding, don't you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, when we talk about the international community, it seems to me that the international community has simply become an exclusive club of Western democracies. And when I hear the term international community, essentially it's almost referring to NATO countries now. To me, what is obvious is the extent to which the strength of the Israel lobby, such as it impacts on domestic politics in the United States through AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League. I really don't think that there is any Israeli politician today who is worthy of any medal. Certainly not the highest medal that could be awarded to by the United States of America. But as was mentioned, this is the price you pay for being president of the United States and having to deal with a lobby that can make or break you.
Over to New York, Michael Santomaro. Perez said he has, quote, a vision of Israel living in full, genuine peace, with Jerusalem becoming the capital of peace. Now, peace seems a virtue untouched by the Israelis, looking at the wars and aggressions it has been involved in inside the region, and most of all, the annexation of Jerusalem al-Quds is not recognized by the international community. Illegal settlement building continues, not to forget the segregation wall. These elements don't constitute a capital of peace. How do you perceive that?
Oh, I agree. It's not. When Obama expressed himself using peace and freedom concerning Perez in the same sentence, it's a sick joke. Obama and Perez are both war criminals in expensive clothing. It's ironic that they both won the Nobel Peace Prize. And if you want to do a gradation, Perez is more of a war criminal than Obama, extensively more so. There's a reason why Perez got the award during the election year here in the United States, because more than half of the funding that Obama is going to be receiving, and he has to rely on, is from the Jewish PAC money that dominates the political arena here in the United States. The Jewish American affluence is the political elite and the financial elite in the United States and Washington politics, both national and local politics. But concerning national politics, you have to filter everything through Jewish PAC money. Is a heavy reliance on Jewish PAC money here in the United States. 35% of the money for the Republican Party comes from Jewish PAC, and 60% of the funding for the Democratic Party comes from Jewish PACs.
Okay, over to our guest in Berkeley, Mr. Paul Arudi. Mr. Santomaro just mentioned the issue of the Jewish vote. Now, this dinner gala comes less than 5 months before the U.S. presidential election, and also amid much speculation that Obama will not be able to emulate the favored position among the Jewish voters. Obama has been insisting that the White House under his administration has strengthened its alliance with Israel. Do you think that this is just another way of Obama trying to show how cordial his administration has been to the Israelis and try to get the Jewish voters behind his campaign?
This is such a cynical way to look at it. Why is it not about freedom? I mean, this is not the award is for freedom, not for peace or humanitarian matters. And I think that Shimon Peres has provided freedom. For example, he has freed fissionable materials, nuclear weapons, from the United States in order to construct an Israeli atomic weapon. He has freed Palestinians from the water underneath their ground. He has freed Palestinians from, he has freed the land in Palestine from its population. he's brought freedom in so many ways, so I think it's appropriate. And I should say, you know, the other awardees of the Medal of Freedom were Bob Dylan and Madeleine Albright. Madeleine Albright is famous for saying that it was entirely justified for 500,000 Iraqi children to starve to death for the sake of the embargo. So I would have to say that Madeleine Albright and Shimon Peres should be honored to be in the company of Bob Dylan.
All right, over to our guest in New York once again. What do you think about Peres receiving the Medal for Freedom? Let's look at his report card. In 1996, during his brief stint as prime minister for the Israeli regime following the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and interestingly, just 2 years after he received the Nobel Peace Prize, he ordered the Israeli army to bomb the UNIFIL headquarters at the village of Ghana in southern Lebanon. In that attack, 106 people were killed and at least 110 were seriously injured.
Well, it could have been stopped if the United States at the time, President Clinton or any president since 1967 has stood up to the Israel lobby. None of these atrocities or war crimes would have been committed. You know, in many ways, when it comes to the Middle East, and maybe even most of the foreign policy worldwide, it's really being dictated in Israel, not in Washington. But getting back to your specific question about 1996, could Clinton have picked up the phone and stopped it? Yeah, but that was also a year, or the year of, for his re-election. He had to rely on the funding that's provided here in the United States by Jewish PACs. You know, Jews only represent about 2% of the population in the United States, but you have to realize there are over 200 major ethnic groups in the United States. The top 30 ethnic groups in the United States represent about 90% of the population. Jewish Americans are somewhere in the middle, like 15, 16. Yet they represent the bulk, either in majority or in plurality, for the funding on presidential elections. 40% of the billionaires in the United States are Jewish Americans. Jews in the United States are the most affluent ethnic group of that top 30 that I was referring to. And Bruce, if you're getting 60% of your funding for the Democratic Party coming from Jewish PACs and 35% of the funding from, for the Republican Party from Jewish PACs, and this is according to Richard Cohn, who's a Jewish American, and he wrote this in his column sometime in 2005 in the Washington Post.
Sure.
He was just updating something that was researched by J.J. Goldberg in his book called Jewish Power that was published in the early 1990s. But getting back again to President Clinton in 1996, he could not have picked up the phone and stopped Peres from doing that atrocity because he was running for re-election.
All right, let's make a transition back to Montreal. Bruce Katz, Peres presided over the 2006 Israeli war on Lebanon and the 2008 assault on Gaza. And going even further back, he had a role in helping apartheid South Africa procure weapons when it was under an international embargo. Is that really the kind of criteria the U.S. wants to advocate for its highest award bestowed upon an individual?
I think that the problem is that foreign policy is never based on, or hardly ever based on, ethical considerations, and certainly not in this case. Were it based on ethical considerations, Israel would have been blacklisted a long time ago. I think it's very interesting that you mention the case of South Africa. It should also be remembered that not only did Israel help South Africa militarily, Israel was also the very last country to recognize the African National Congress government, which replaced the apartheid regime. And that's basically because Israel recognized itself in South African apartheid. What you have is a society that's based on the notion of racial purity, and basically what the history of Israel has been essentially has been a white European settler society that has displaced an indigenous people. Were it not for the fact that in the United States political parties depend to such an extent on private funding, and basically the Supreme Court has passed a judgment on this on the side of private funding, that makes it essentially impossible to avoid the strength of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. So you basically have a catch-22 situation, and that is the major reason, in my opinion, why Israel continues to act with impunity and basically disregards the whole question of international law.
Paul Larudi, tell us who is calling the shots when it comes to U.S.-Israel relations. Is it Washington or is it Tel Aviv?
There's a lot of debate about that. And what I like to say is that Israel has a lot of money to spend, and a lot of that money is provided by the U.S. government. It's a revolving door. And Israel invests that money in groups like the think tank, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the Hudson Institute, and others, which influence U.S. policy. So Israel is a big player in determining U.S. policy, like probably no other foreign country is. Now, they choose people who believe that they're good Americans, and that these people, like Paul Wolfowitz and so forth, who believe that they're acting in American interests. It's just that people have different ideas about what constitutes American interests. And therefore, with Israeli money and Israeli influence, they can select those people whose beliefs or whose agenda are fit best with the Israeli agenda. I don't think there's a contradiction here as to whether it is actually in U.S. interests or against U.S. interests. Israel is choosing the people who believe that U.S. interests are identical to Israeli interests. And that's very disturbing to those of us who think, no, it's not identical at all, and it's causing us great harm.
Mr. Larudi, I have another question for you. In 2010...
I strongly disagree.
Well, sure. Okay, Mr. Santamor, if you have anything to add, please do so.
Well, he's referring to American interest. I think the parallel he was trying to make is not correct. Israel is not a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic issue. It has to do with PAC money and funding for the Democratic Party in majority money, and for the Republican Party in plurality money. You can't compete with that. It's a very cohesive ethnic group here in the United States. They will dictate the terms just based on where the money's, just based on the power of financial elite power that they have.
But where's the money coming from? The money is coming from the money. But where's the money coming from? Where are they getting their money? Their money is coming from contracts that Israeli consumers or the Israeli government has with U.S. companies that are paid through U.S. aid to those companies, and therefore that money gets recycled back to the U.S. and those who receive U.S. money are investing some of that money in the influence of the Israel lobby in Washington. It's a circular process there, and they donate money to create groups like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Well, Mr. Larudi, I do have.
There's no obligation on the part.
All right, allow me to get this question by Mr. Larudi. In 2010, Israeli commandos attacked the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in international waters and killed 9 people and have yet to be held accountable. How can the Israelis enjoy such impunity when the facts are there, eyewitness accounts are clear-cut? The old saying comes to mind that if one keeps breaking the law over and over again, people will stop noticing it.
Well, you've made the argument yourself. I was on that flotilla, and I know as well as anyone what happened there. But this is standard procedure. As I mentioned earlier, Shimon Peres was in charge of establishing the nuclear weapons program in Israel, and they blatantly stole nuclear weapons-grade uranium from Pennsylvania that was transported over there in order to do this. Nobody touched them on that either. But look what they're saying about a fictional Iranian program to create nuclear weapons. The program doesn't even exist. And they're making a big fuss about it. The hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, countries do this. They do what they believe is in their interest. And your other guests are right that what's in the interests of the leaders of our government, regardless of who's the president or who's in Congress and so forth, is to get reelected. And they get reelected through the money and the influence and the connections in the media and all kinds of things that the Israel lobby has in the United States.
Right.
And it only makes the Israel lobby stronger because they have the ability through the Congress to finance themselves with the foreign aid that they vote for Israel.
Right. Let's bring Bruce Katz back into the discussion. Mr. Katz, 6 years on, and the Gaza siege still continues, which has effectively turned Gaza into the largest open-air prison on the planet. How come there's been no rock-hard action to get the Israelis to stop the blockade, which is resulting effectively in the direct deaths of Gazans on a daily basis?
Well, this is where you see the blatant hypocrisy of the so-called Western democracies and their vision of freedom for all. They choose which regimes to prop up, which regimes to demonize. There's been no greater culprit on the question of what's been done to the Palestinians in Gaza than the government of Canada, especially the present government of Canada, which can vie with anything that, as a matter of fact, I think they've even gone past the United States for pandering to the Israel lobby. And again, that is part of Canadian domestic politics. The Harper government is very largely subsidized by an organization like the Canadian Institute for Israel and Jewish Advocacy, which is putting millions into conservative coffers. We have the very same problem here, and it's the same problem that exists in other countries. It's convenient, politically convenient, for these governments to pander to pro-Israel lobby by demonizing Gaza, calling the people their terrorists, and essentially allowing them to slowly starve to death.
Okay, we're running short of time.
Mr.
Katz, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you there. We are running short of time. I have one last question I want to address to all three of you gentlemen, and I'd like a brief answer, if you may. Mr. Santamoro, is Israel an asset or a liability to the United States, and why?
Oh, it's an extreme liability. It's caused a lot of headaches and problems for America. 9/11 would not have happened had we not have had a lopsided foreign policy in the Middle East. And I just want to touch on the other guest about the monies. Some of the monies does get funneled back to the United States, of the billions and billions that we give to Israel every year. But there's no strings attached and there's no obligation how Israel spends that money, as opposed to Egypt, where there are strings attached.
All right, Mr. Larudi, an asset or a liability to the United States?
In objective terms, you have to say that Israel is a liability. I mean, let's go back to what Father Sheehan said many years ago. When people ask me, when people say to me that we need Israel to defend us against our enemies in the Middle East, my response to them is, if it were not for Israel, we would have no enemies in the Middle East. This is the problem that we face.
And Mr. Bruce Katz, what do you think? Is Israel an asset or a liability to the United States?
Well, it's certainly a liability if what you have to do is essentially destroy your foreign policy and basically cut ties with Arab nations to pander to a country that's been breaking international law for years.
Okay.
It's essentially a question of cutting off.
We're just going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry, we are running short of time. Many thanks to my guests for contributing to the program. From the Free Palestine Movement, Paul Larudi from Berkeley, freelance journalist and blogger Mr. Michael Santomaro from New York, and co-president of the Palestinian and Jewish Unity, Mr. Bruce Katz from Montreal. That's a wrap for this show. Join us again, same time, same place tomorrow for another edition of Press TV's News Analysis.